In recent weeks, there's been an escalation of some rhetoric between presidential hopefuls Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg.
Those exchanges are reminiscent of the sparring match between Howard Dean and Dick Gephardt back in 2004. I bet you didn't think we were going there. Here to highlight the similarities and the possible impact the rivalry could have on the Democratic primary is correspondent for The Hill, Reid Wilson. Great to have you, sir.
Hi, see you, Reid.
All right, tell us about this dynamic.
This really struck me so much as we go through the race as it stands right now. The comparisons to 2004 just leap out at me. You've got a progressive, populist, northeastern liberal, basically, who is rising in the polls. She is being challenged by a moderate Midwesterner. I mean, are we talking about Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg, or are we talking about Howard Dean and Dick Gephardt back in 2004? And if you'll remember, the structure of the race back then was really similar to what it is now. Those two were leading in Iowa, but not in the national polls. In the national polls, John Kerry and Joe Lieberman were still up sort of at the top of the heap. And that's what we see today. We've got Joe Biden leading in the national polls, but not leading in any of the early states.
That's right.
So,
South Carolina.
Right.
Except
South Carolina. But let's talk about the first two, which really build the sort of momentum. No Democrat has won the nomination without winning Iowa since Bill Clinton back in 1992, and he was running against a senator from Iowa. So, you know, a little bit of a caveat there.
True.
But we see these parallels, and what happened in 2004 is effectively Howard Dean and Dick Gephardt. The irony, by the way, is that Howard Dean supported Dick Gephardt in the 1988 presidential campaign, but they sort of went to war with each other over a number of different things. Howard Dean ran an advertisement that showed Dick Gephardt next to George W. Bush signing the authorization for war in Iraq, and the Gephardt campaign called that the first negative advertisement ever run in the Iowa caucuses. We've seen plenty of
Seems like a pretty fair attack there.
You know, they showed the picture. But the fact that they went to war with each other, and they ended up taking each other down. At the very end, John Edwards scored the coveted endorsement of the Des Moines Register, and the final voting order was John Kerry, John Edwards, Howard Dean in a close third, but Dick Gephardt basically collapsed at that point.
It's a very interesting parallel there. So what can we learn about that from this particular race? Is it that Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren very much have the capability to take themselves out? I mean, in some cases, that's kind of what's happening. I wouldn't say that Buttigieg took Warren out. She kind of did it herself with the healthcare rollout, but perhaps he's contributed to that.
And we've seen Buttigieg's numbers fall nationally, at least. I haven't seen any recent Iowa polling, but the fact is, you know, Iowa voters are very touchy about candidates going after each other. And at some point, you actually have to take a stab at one of the other candidates if you want to rise yourself, or at least take them down a peg. So this is real tough political brinksmanship here, and both candidates are at risk of losing whatever momentum they had in Iowa.
Yeah, I believe it was Morning Consult's early primary states polling that had Pete dropping 4 points this week. So I think you are starting to see signs of that, which is very interesting. Talk about the game plan for Warren. New York Times has a big piece this morning about how she's retooling her strategy. I mean, she was really the hot commodity this summer. She was on the rise consistently. She was garnering tons of positive press. It seemed like it was nothing but up for her. And then through her own mistakes over healthcare, and also Pete sort of opportunistically attacking her and seizing some of her support, she has really, really dramatically fallen out of second place for sure, and in some places even out of third place down into fourth place. What is the game plan for her to get back in the mix here?
Well, we've seen her in the last couple of weeks retooling sort of her stump speech. You know, her gig here is, I've got a plan for this. Let me tell you about my 17,000 policy proposals. And
that always works great for Democrats when we do that.
Look, it does in the state of Iowa. It does work when basically what she's competing for. She and Buttigieg are competing for, despite their sort of opposite ideological strains, they're competing for the same voters. And those voters are well-educated whites in Iowa who are going to dominate the caucus process. What we've seen lately from her is her talking less about her 18,000 plans, 17,000, whatever it is, and instead answering more questions from Iowa voters, spending a lot less time on her stump speech and a lot more time actually responding to voters. That's what Buttigieg has been doing on the trail, and it works really well
been doing that.
in an Iowa
It's a
county.
format that is very conducive to, I think, for him. So what have you seen, Reid? I have seen some reporting from the ground that in Iowa and in New Hampshire, she's getting a lot of questions still on healthcare. That even though it faded out, the vast majority of the questions she gets are on healthcare. Is that what you've been seeing?
I haven't seen any of the recent town halls, but I mean, the answering questions suggest to me that she's giving voters a chance to tell her what's wrong, and sort of reassuring them. That's something that Iowans do. I mean, the Iowa voters take this stuff really seriously. One of my favorite part about going out to Iowa and reporting is talking to just an average person. If you talk to an average person in any normal state, they'll say, you know, why do you support Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg? They don't really know. They kind of like what they look like. They might have an idea about their plan for one particular thing. An Iowa voter can go through and tell you 5 or 6 different reasons why they like candidate X or candidate Y, why a certain candidate is on their list. They're very thoughtful about this. And remember, the caucus process is not like a primary where you just go in and pick a candidate and walk out. You've got to be there. You've got to invest a few hours of your time on a snowy February night where, you know, it's going to be freezing in whatever school gymnasium they're going to be in Des Moines or any other town around there. And you have to have a debate. Like, you line up in the first part of the caucus process, and maybe your candidate doesn't meet the threshold and therefore isn't viable, so you get to realign and go with the second candidate. I mean, it takes a lot of thought. It's a very small population that's going to turn out. We might only see the turnout's going to be huge this year, but at the top end, it'll be 300,000 people, which may be just as many as who vote in the New Hampshire primary. New Hampshire's half the size of Iowa. So, you know, people are pretty thoughtful about this stuff.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Reid, thank you so much.
Thank you, Reid. Coming up, you're probably not surprised that some of America's big tech firms are very closely linked to some foreign financial interests.
We talked to a reporter about the connections between Saudi Arabia and Silicon Valley and why it matters. That One Rising continues.